Okay, so this might be a shorter chapter book read aloud today because when I read to you the last time, the chapter was really long and I can only record, pardon me, for 15 minutes. And I was like right up against it. So I didn't want to keep going. So I'm going to read you the rest of chapter 5 today and we can find out what happens with Ramona and her owl and Susan's owl and what's going to happen with the fact that she destroyed Susan's owl and then left school. Like, that's a really big deal. So let's read and find out what happened. So when we left off, she was running home and she had tripped and fallen and skinned her knees. She was bleeding. Ramona burst through the back door, safe from something. Mama, Mama, I fell down, she managed between gasps. Oh, poor baby. Mrs. Quimby took one look at Ramona's bloody legs and led her into the bathroom, where she knelt and cleaned the wounds, dabbed them with antiseptic, and covered them with Band-Aids. Her mother's sympathy made Ramona feel very sorry for herself. Poor little misunderstood first grader. Mrs. Quimby wiped Ramona's sweaty, tear-stained face with a damp washcloth, kissed Ramona for comfort, and said, "That's my brave girl." Ramona wanted to say, "But I'm not brave, Mama. I'm scared because I did something bad." Yet she could not bring herself to admit the truth. Poor little Ramona had with her wounded knees. It was all mean old Susan's fault for being such a copycat. Mrs. Quimby sat back on her heels. "Guess what?" she said. "What?" Ramona hoped for a glorious surprise to make up for her unhappy day. Ramona always longed for glorious surprises. That was the way she was. The workmen finished the new room, and before they left, they moved your bed and the dresser and bookcase we had stored in the garage, and tonight you are going to sleep in your very own room. Really? This actually was a glorious surprise. There had been days when the workmen had not come at all, and the whole Quimby family had despaired of the room ever being completed. Ramona's knees hurt, but who cared? She ran down the hall to see the room for herself. Yes, there was her bed in one corner, the bookcase filled with more toys than books. In another, and against the wall, the dresser. For the first time, Ramona looked into her very own mirror in her very own room. She saw a stranger, a girl with red eyes and a puffy tear-stained face, who did not look at all the way Ramona pictured herself. Ramona thought of herself as the kind of girl everyone should like, but this girl... Ramona scowled, and the girl scowled back. Ramona managed a small smile. So did the girl. Ramona felt better. She wanted the girl in the mirror to like her. So that was pretty short, 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I wasn't going to make it on the other recording though. So we're going to go ahead and start chapter 6 because it's parents' night, and that has to do with the owl. Sorry, my chair is really squeaky. That has to do with the owl that Ramona made. So we won't finish chapter 6, but we'll read part of it. Ramona stood inside her new closet, pretending she was in an elevator. She slid open the door and stepped out into her new room, which she pretended was on the 10th floor. There she drew a deep breath, inhaling the fragrance of new wood and the flat smell of sheetrock, which her father was going to paint when he found time. Her mother had been too busy to find curtains for the windows or to clean the smudges of putty from the glass, but Ramona didn't mind. Tonight she was going to sleep for the first time in her very own for 6 months room, the only room in the house with a sliding closet door and windows that opened out instead of going up and down. "Ramona, Howie's grandmother's here," called Mrs. Quimby. "We're going now." Ramona stepped back into her closet, slid the door shut, pressed an imaginary button, and when her imaginary elevator had made its imaginary descent, stepped out onto the first real floor and faced a real problem. Her mother and father were leaving for parents' night. After Ramona said hello to Howie's grandmother. "Say hello to Howie's grandmother, Ramona." She flopped down in a chair and peeled off one end of a Band-Aid to examine her sore knee. She was disappointed when Howie's grandmother did not notice. "I don't see why you have to go to parents' night," Ramona said to her mother and father. "It's probably boring." "Oh, we want to hear what Mrs. Griggs has to say," said Mrs. Quimby. Well, this is what worried Ramona. "And I want to meet the famous Mr. Cardoza," said Mr. Quimby. "We've been hearing so much about him." "Daddy, you're really going to like him," said Beezus. "Do you know what he said when I got 5 wrong on my math test? He said, 'Good, now I can see what it is you don't understand.' And then he said he was there to help me understand, and he did." "We're going over to Howie's house after parents' night," said Mrs. Quimby, "but we won't be late." Beezus made a face and said to Ramona, "That means they'll talk about their children, and they always do." Ramona knew her sister spoke the truth. Mr. Quimby smiled as he went out the door. Don't worry, we won't reveal the family secrets. Beezus went off to her room, eager to do her homework on the new-to-her desk. Ramona pulled off the other Band-Aid and examined her other knee. She wondered if what Mrs. Griggs was sure to say about Susan's owl would be considered a family secret. She poked her sore knee and said, "Ouch," so Howie's grandmother could not help hearing. When Mrs. Kemp failed to ask, "Why, Ramona, how did you hurt your knee?" Ramona stuck the Band-Aid back in place and studied her sitter. Mrs. Kemp, who wore glasses with purple frames, was not the sort of sitter who played games with children. When she came to sit, she sat. She was sitting on the couch and knitting something out of green wool while she looked at an old movie on television. Some boring thing about grown-ups who talked a lot and didn't do much of anything. Ramona liked good, lively comedies with lots of children and animals and grown-ups doing silly things. Next to that, she liked cat food commercials. Ramona picked up the evening paper from the floor beside her chair. "Well, I guess I'll read the paper," she said, showing off for Howie's grandmother. She studied the headlines, making sort of a mental buzz when she came to words she could not read. "To run for," she read. "To go up." She turned a page. "To play." Guys, has Mrs. Miller told us specifically not to read like that? You always have a tool to help you solve tricky words. Ramona should know better. "And what is the news tonight?" asked Mrs. Kemp, her eyes on the television set. "Oh, attention at last. Somebody's going to play some kind of ball," answered Ramona, proud to have actually read something in the newspaper. She hoped Mrs. Kemp would say, "Why, Ramona, I had no idea you were such a good reader." "Oh, I see," said Mrs. Kemp, a remark Ramona knew grown-ups made when they were not interested in conversation with children. Ramona tried again. "I know how to set the table," she boasted. Instead of saying, "You must be a big help to your mother," Mrs. Kemp only murmured, "Mm-hmm," with her eyes on the television set. Ramona said, "I have a room of my own, and tonight I'm going to sleep in it all myself." "That's nice," said Mrs. Kemp absently. Ramona gave up. Mrs. Kemp did not know the right answers. The clock said 7:30. Even though Ramona had fought long and hard for the right to stay up until 8:15 and was now working on 8:30, she decided that since her parents were not there, she would not lose ground in her battle for a later bedtime by going to bed early to try out her new room. She said goodnight and took her bath without using her washcloth, so she would not have to waste time wringing it out and hanging it up. Then she got into bed, turned out her lights, said her prayers, asking God to bless her family, including Picky Picky, and there she lay, a big girl alone in her bed in a room of her own. Unfortunately, in spite of pretending bedtime had come, Ramona was wide awake, with nothing to do but think. She lay there wondering what was happening at school. Guilt over Susan's owl grew heavy within her. What would happen when her mother and father heard the whole terrible story? They would be disappointed in Ramona, that's what they'd be, and nothing made Ramona feel worse than knowing that her parents were disappointed in her. In spite of Howie's grandmother's knitting on the couch, the house seemed empty. Ramona thought about how bad she was. She thought about the gorilla book in her bookcase and wished she had not. The sound of gunfire and a woman's scream came from the television set. Nothing to be scared about, Ramona told herself, just the TV. She wished her window had curtains. Although Ramona dreaded knowing what Mrs. Griggs would say, she felt she had to know. As Beezus had predicted, her parents were sure to talk on and on with Howie's parents about their children. Mrs. Kemp would say Howie needed to learn to be creative, and Ramona's mother would say Ramona needed to learn to be responsible like Beezus. There was no telling what the fathers would say, although fathers, Ramona knew, did not spend as much time as mothers thinking up ways to improve their children. Ramona decided to act. She got out of bed and pattered down the hall in her bare feet. Howie's grandmother looked up from her knitting. "It's past your bedtime, Ramona," she said. So time had passed after all. "I know," said Ramona, and could not resist boasting a little. "I have to leave a note for my mother." On the notepad by the telephone, she carefully printed, "Come here, Mother. Come here to me." It's pretty good for a first grader in September. No need to sign the note. Her mother would know who it was from because Beezus wrote cursive. Ramona left her note on the table beside the front door where the family always looked for mail and messages. She sidled closer to Howie's grandmother, pretending interest in her knitting, which appeared to be a smaller sweater of strange shape. "Is that for a doll?" asked Ramona. Mrs. Kemp's eyes were on the television screen, where two boring grown-ups were saying goodbye forever to one another. "It's a sweater for my little Dachshund," which is a dog. she answered. When I finish, I'm going to make a little beret to match. Now, run along to bed. And I'm going to stop there, and we will finish the rest of chapter 6, and we will find out, I lost my train of thought. We will find out what Ramona's parents heard at Parents' Night with Mrs. Griggs. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be good or bad, guys. All right, I'll see you soon. Have a good afternoon.